thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation with me. Perhaps just as a way to start, would you like to just introduce yourself? What institution you're at, your primary research focus,
Absolutely.
and yeah.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this. So my name is Jean-Marc Grazioli. I'm an associate professor of computational chemistry at San Jose State University. So my subdiscipline, I'm a physical chemist, and then you get more specific. I'm a computational chemist, so I do theory and computation.
Mhm.
Um, let's see. So my research group, we do a lot of things, but AI is kind of interwoven throughout much of it.
Mhm.
Basically, I my journey with AI and chemistry began a little over a decade ago. So I've been at it for a while.
Mhm.
I love artificial intelligence. I think there's so much to be done with it, and in ways that, human in the loop sort of thing. And we're not trying to replace human
Yeah.
intelligence, but more augment it. So yeah, so some of the things we do in my group, I'll give you an example of a project. This is like my NIH funded work, so I think that's a good place to start. So we have there's something called the network Hamiltonian model. It's a way of modeling um, molecular self-assembly, where you have molecules that are free in solution and then, they start forming some organized structure. So you could say like crystallization is an example of this. That's a very common thing that you get this really ordered thing, right? So like, local entropy is going down. Um, but amyloid fibril formation is a similar process, except instead of, growing along three axes of growth, and you have this three-dimensional crystal structure, the periodic structure occurs in a single line. So you have a single growth axis for an amyloid fibril. And so you get basically these ropes that get spontaneously woven out of protein. And they're tied to different diseases like Alzheimer's disease and Huntington's disease. And so we study those using these network Hamiltonian models that we can actually simulate these molecules finding each other in solution and spontaneously forming these structures. And these models are notoriously difficult to parameterize. And so one of the things we developed in my group is a genetic algorithm. So that's a form of artificial intelligence where we simulate the evolution of models. So rather than trying to find one perfect model, we create generations of models. And then, no one's getting hurt. It's all on a computer, but we have to, sort of kill off the, maybe bottom 90%, right? The lowest performers, we get rid of those. And then we take the best performers. We have like a breeding process where we find the best models that come from those models, and then just repeat. And we simulate evolution of these models. And so that's an example of an AI application in my group.
Awesome. Awesome. So the reason I wanted to talk to you is, I mean, clearly you use AI a lot as a researcher.
Mhm.
Um, but at that ACS conference in Washington, D.C., you were talking about five foundational principles for teaching chemistry students to use AI effectively. And they
Yes.
just occurred to me to be very useful. So we'll just go through those five principles if we can. So the first one is written, AI in education is more than ChatGPT. Can you just flesh that out for me a little bit?
Absolutely, yes. So I think, with this explosion in AI isn't, there were some technological advances recently in AI, but I think the big thing that made it blow up the way it blew up is how usable the generative AI tools are, like ChatGPT. So I think the temptation is folks will spend a lot of time playing with ChatGPT, getting it to do different things for them. And then they figure, okay, that's AI. I get it. I know what AI does. I know what it can't do based on that one narrow experience with ChatGPT. So, I think we've got some kind of pseudo experts out there who, they sort of extrapolate a little too far of what AI is based on that one example. So artificial intelligence is actually not a very specific term. So it's a huge umbrella term that encompasses things like machine learning, right? And so I have this graphic that I sometimes use. I can send it to you later in case you want to, put it in.
Sure.
But basically, I have this graphic that's not even complete that shows all of the different things that are included under the umbrella of artificial intelligence. And so, things like supervised learning versus unsupervised learning, what's overfitting. There's so many concepts in artificial intelligence that go far beyond what ChatGPT is, but ChatGPT is built on a foundation of these things. So like the notion of a classifier that you give it different inputs and it says like what type of data is that, right? So simple example, pictures of dogs versus pictures of cats. That could be a classifier you could train. Well, when you use ChatGPT, it's not just a large language model you're working with. The large language model provides that easy to use interface that you just talk to it like a person.
Hmm.
So the large language model enabled it is sort of like that was the catalyst that set things off. But there's so many other things going on. For example, like if I take a picture of an equation and upload that and it solves it, the large language model didn't do that. A classifier first said, this is a picture of an equation. And then like a image to text AI model then took my equation. So first the classifier said, this image is an equation. It passed it to something else that would then convert written text into computer code for that equation.
Hmm.
And then probably Mathematica or Wolfram did the heavy lifting. And then, the LLM kind of delivers the news at the end, right? So
Yeah.
that's sort of what I'm saying. Like that's kind of an example. Like there's
Yeah.
so much to it that you're missing if all you do is play with ChatGPT.
Right. Right. And so the important thing there is understanding the one, the complexity of the space, but two, if you understand the complexity of the space, you can then use it much more meaningfully
Yes.
in whatever task you want to do, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and so that's sort of that actually kind of brings that's a perfect segue into the second concept that foundational computational thinking is essential.
Hmm.
Like developing this notion of computational thinking. What are the inputs? What are the processes? And what's the output? So that's kind of like what I was saying with that example of
Right.
okay, I take a picture of an equation, but are you thinking meaningfully about what's actually happening? Like
Mm.
if there's like for example, I remember there was something where just to kind of give you another example, I remember there was something where people were doing like cartoons of themselves using DALL-E through the ChatGPT interface or the
Uh-huh.
OpenAI interface. And there is such a thing as image to image, right? Input is an image, output is image, there's some process in the middle. You can have image to image, you can have image to video, right? The input and output. But what it was actually doing, what I realized is like you upload an image, it had an image to text
Okay.
model, right? So it's converting that to text and describing what you look like. Then that text was going back into a text to image model, right? So it's going through this text layer that was kind of
Okay.
like, that's kind of weak, if that's how you're generating these images. But then, like human nature, we're programmed to see patterns and like,
Mm.
it's sort of like it's echoing your own ego back to you. So like, we're all sort of like biased to be like, oh my God, that cartoon really does look like me. But like if you really wanted to make something like that, you should actually train an image to image AI model, like a neural net or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. But I mean that idea of sort of computational thinking becomes so important, right? Because you is recognizing the steps that need to take place in order to solve a problem or optimize a situation or whatever it is.
Yep.
That if you're not clear about the steps, you're also going to use the generative AI or whatever it is that you're using, you're going to use poorly,
Right, exactly.
potentially.
Yeah, if you don't have a good mental model of what's actually happening under the hood, you're gonna do kind of crazy things. Like if to use like a driving example, if you drive a manual transmission car and you don't think about what's happening when you slip the clutch, and you might think like, okay, I'm just gonna keep doing this. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because you're like, oh yeah, this is just the thing that like it transmits power. I don't know what's happening, right? But then
Yeah.
you think about it more consciously. You're like, maybe I shouldn't do it quite so gradually and burn my clutch out. So it's
Yeah.
it's sort of that thing of like having some knowledge of what it's doing under the hood is important.
Yeah. And then that really builds in terms of thinking about chemists in particular, but scientists more generally, thinking about developing that skill as part of your undergraduate training so that whatever you
Yes.
go on to next,
Yep.
uh, particularly if you're going to go into research, you know what it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that these tools are just going to get more and more powerful.
Right.
And so knowing how to use them properly requires that kind of computational thinking, that
Exactly.
it's these steps and this is the action involved in going from this step to the next step.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yep. Understand what the processes are. And that's kind of back to what I was saying. Back to the first point of like AI is all of these things. I think like if faculty and students are going to be serious about using AI tools, I think they really need to learn like what these things are and just some of the basic concepts. Even if it's just a qualitative understanding, like
Mm,
you can describe things like overfitting and these sort of concepts that are fundamental to AI. I think everyone and the different types, right? Classifiers
mm,
versus supervised, unsupervised, all these sort of things. I think it's certainly possible to even construct a course, right? Like a qualitative understanding of AI. And I think
mm.
that can go a long way.
Yeah, yeah. And that really comes into your third point, which is that precise language matters, right?
Yes, exactly.
Knowing
Right.
what it is that this thing actually is and what lever you're pulling at this point in the process, what is
Exactly.
actually doing the hard work here or the heavy lifting,
Exactly.
um,
Yeah.
is
And
it is an important part of sort of AI literacy, if you like.
yes. Exactly. Yeah. And I think everything from like, sort of steering classroom conversations, like if you're discussing a use of some sort of artificial intelligence
Mm,
and I think discourage the use of AI terms. Student says like, well, what if you use the AI to do this to that? Be like, okay, which type of AI? What's your input? What's your process? What's your output?
yeah.
Sort of guide them back to that computational thinking using precise language. I
Mm,
think that's a really important thing.
mm,
Um, yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And that then, I guess, if you know exactly what it is that you're talking about, that then takes us on to four, which is the benefits and limitations, is knowing
Right.
that this tool can do this thing well,
Right.
but this other tool might be able to do it, but uh,
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, I think that's true. These generative models that like you can kind of get them to try to do anything. Like I could work with say DALL-E and say
Mhm.
like, oh, I have this data. I want to plot that data, and it'll make some real sciencey looking figure that like means absolutely nothing. But like maybe you could
Right.
put it in the background in a movie, and people will be like, yeah, science. But it won't actually say anything. Whereas on the other hand, if you say like, well, okay, I want to do a data visualization, let me at least have like a smaller like dummy data set that I
Mhm.
can upload that to ChatGPT and say, hey, I want you to use Python to make a data visualization, and it'll do its best to get close to what you want. And then if you've sort of spent some time learning a little Python, then you can sort of take that and be like, well, let me shape this a little bit, right? If you can read it and say like, well, that must be the size of the title. Let me increase that number a little bit, see if the title gets bigger, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's actually really an interesting idea then, because again, that takes us on to step five, and that you say that programming is or principle five, that programming is a gateway skill,
Yep.
that you could actually teach yourself a lot in Python through that
Yeah.
sort of trial and error. Let me play with things, see if I can figure out what's doing what.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, I think even before like there were AI tools, like I think that's so most of my programming skills are self-taught, right? So I've been writing code for well over a decade. I've a few languages and stuff like that. I'm pretty good,
mm,
but most of the stuff that I know, I taught myself, like from reading books or you
yeah,
look online, things like Stack Overflow, right? You Google a error message you're getting, and
yeah,
you can get really far with it. So we got quite far with that before there was ChatGPT. It would basically be, okay, let me Google it, see what sort of websites come up,
yeah,
see if, and things like Stack Overflow, you could upvote or downvote responses and stuff. And like, it's a really nice ecosystem. And in fact, one of the reasons why ChatGPT can do so well with coding is it trained on those forums, right? It
right,
used that data. In fact, there's a concern now that like, okay, so if we wanted to keep getting good at coding and adopting new paradigms that come along, if everyone's just using ChatGPT, it's going to be kind of circular. So like, how are they going
right,
to find their next set of good training data if everyone's just going to ChatGPT? It's so it's too circular. So it's
right.
from thinking about it like a genetic algorithm, right? Kind of inbreeding.
Yes.
If you've got it's just developing off of the same stuff. Um, but yeah, there has never been a better time to teach yourself to code. Like it's never been easier to learn how to code than it is now. In fact, I think the danger is actually slipping too far into, what they call vibe coding, right? Where,
Right.
you tell the thing what you want, it produces a code, you run it and see what it does. If that's not quite the thing, then you'd be like, well, you're doing this, I wanted that, and it gives you new code, you run that. Oh, now it threw an error. All right, let me give it the error. Okay, it fixes that. Where you never actually read any of the code. You just keep firing away prompts, getting the new code, asking it to fix it, etc. So I have concerns about that on one hand. On the other hand, like, you can kind of figure some stuff out like that. So I think it's important that, like, even if you're not amazing at writing the Python code, if at least you get really good at reading it. And
Mm.
as far as the languages I've worked with, I mean, what's more readable than Python? It's so readable. It's very readable code. So, I think sort of, so one thing that I do to try and combat this, when I give my students coding projects in the classroom, so I do a lot of like project-based learning. I kind of call it project-based learning meets the Socratic method, where I'm just asking them lots of questions. They ask me how do I fix this? Well, what should I prompt or what should I Google? I kind of give them another question and we figure it out together rather than just telling them the answer. Um, but one thing that I do, so as far as like completing the projects, a lot of times, if I have a big coding project like that, I'll make it roughly a 70-30 split, where 70% is just how well their code does the thing it was supposed to do. And they're allowed to work with each other. They can ask a
Mhm.
friend for help. They can ask ChatGPT, the internet, whatever they want. Don't care. Do whatever you want. In the end, that last 30%, we're having an oral exam. I'm going to say, what does that line do? What does that line do? What's the
Okay.
data type that this function takes in? What data type does it output? I ask
Okay.
these kind of questions so that basically, as long as they can explain what it does in the end, I don't care that much how they got there. And so, like, if you're sort of doing a vibe coding kind of thing, but in the end you're kind of making sure it's doing something that you can explain, then I'm kind of okay with that.
Right.
Um, and another way to sort of encourage students too is, like, don't ask for like a code that does the entire thing you want to do. Think about what components you need. Ask it for individual components and you assemble it yourself so that you know what the different components are doing. Maybe have it write test functions as you go.
Hmm.
There's ways to do AI assisted programming that's actually quite good, right? There's a way
Hmm.
that you can go into just making, vibe coded nonsense that nobody understands what it's doing.
Yeah.
But there's a way to do it really well. And I think
Right.
that's the path forward. And I encourage my students to use these tools because I think, like, I want my students to be really competitive in the in the
Hmm.
workforce. Like,
Hmm.
education serves many purposes. One of them is job training. And I
Hmm.
I embrace that, and I think that's great. And so I think, like, in the end, like, folks who can work much faster and more efficiently by incorporating these tools, I think are always going to be ahead of people who are like, nope, I'm going to figure it out on my own. I think they're always going to be kind of slower. So
Yeah.
I think it's important. Like, I'd rather sort of have students learn from me how to use this stuff correctly than to kind of go off on their own and do their own thing with
Mm.
it and maybe slip into some sort of vibe coding mess.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, what you're talking about there is being very clear on the task that they're trying to achieve, right?
Mhm.
So to say, okay, for this step, this is what I'm going to ask, and for this step, this is what I'm going to ask,
Yep.
rather than saying, please complete this whole project.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah. And then you don't
because
know
then
what
it's
to do.
also really hard to know, like, is this a real answer or is this?
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Is it getting the right answer for the wrong reasons? That's kind of the scariest one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If I've seen, like, kind of like cartoons and memes about this too, where you have like an inexperienced programmer who's like, "Oh, why isn't my code working?" And then you have a more experienced one being like, "Why is it working? Like, this shouldn't work." Like, so, you don't. If something works the first time, there's probably, like, you get sort of cynical after a while after you've done a lot of software development, and like, we want students to develop that sort of instinct to be like, wait a minute, to not just don't trust it the minute it confirms that, don't have a confirmation bias for your own code.
Right, right. And that comes back to um, teaching students really evaluative judgment, right? How do I know that this answer is a good answer? What am I drawing on apart from, gut instinct or, "Oh, yay, I've got an answer. I can go and have a beer,"
Right, right. Yeah.
Uh, is and coupling that with your emphasis on computational thinking, I think then becomes very powerful, because then the training of a scientist is about your way of thinking,
Yes.
um, that may be trained on a particular, computational chemistry or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
if you know what the structure of your thinking is, that is then actually quite transferable.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and I think like, in different, I think was what you're saying too is that, this isn't just for people who want to be computational chemists. Like this is
Mm.
for any scientist. Like I think particularly like if you're in a more experimental background and you're a disciplined person and like, well, I have to do 10 replicates, I'm doing 10 replicates, right? Like that's
Yeah.
sort of like that's a positive thing, like working in the lab, yes. But like if you're thinking that way with computational things and like you're like, well, I just need to keep plugging away on this Excel sheet or just kind of like if you're clicking on things repetitively, you should stop and be like, wait a minute, can I do this with a loop? Is there some sort
Yeah.
of, can I automate this? Right. And,
Yeah.
and that's something that like if people who are trained to think computationally, like computational chemists, computer scientists,
Mm.
a lot of engineers, that sort of thing, like you go there immediately. But I think I've certainly talked to plenty of people who have kind of more an experimental background and that wonderful discipline that makes them like get things done in the lab. You actually don't want to think that way with
Right.
computational things, right? You want to think, wait a minute, can I always talk about it in terms of like, my physical chemistry background, right? Getting
Hmm.
over activation energy.
Yeah.
You say like, well, if I spend some time building some code to do this thing, like let's say there's some task I'm going to do, I could get it done in 3 hours by doing something repetitive, or I could spend like 5 or 6 hours writing a code that does it for me. But then the next time I see this, I can do it in a minute. So you have to get
Right.
over that activation energy,
Yeah.
like do that work, okay, get over the barrier to get into that lower energy state where you can hang out for the rest of your career doing that particular task.
Yeah. Yeah. But then I think that again, these AI tools are really big at lowering that activation energy, for students who are not necessarily used to using that as a way of thinking. It
Right.
really does help.
Definitely.
Um, yeah, excellent. What haven't I asked you that I should be asking you? What
Let's
are other
see.
things?
So one thing that I meant to mention that on one of the which one was it on the oh yeah, I think it was kind of comes off of the it's more than ChatGPT, the first point. One thing that
Hmm.
I wanted to mention too is that if you try a tool, like we are kind of saying that like you can try these different tools and like a lot of the generative tools, they'll do something, right? And they'll give you something that's a bad answer. And you want to be careful how you react to that because like, we all have biases. We can't get away
Mm.
from it. It's just how, we
Yeah,
recognize patterns. Patterns produce biases. We're human
yeah,
beings. But I think when you ask an AI to do something that you're good at, you're biased. You kind of want to see it fail,
yeah,
because that it
yeah,
hurt, it hurts. And like I mentioned in my talk at the
yeah.
ACS meeting, like the biggest response I ever got with that was an AI that was playing guitar solos. Like that really
Right.
like that like wounded me. I was like, oh, and like the solo wasn't it was fine. It wasn't an amazing solo, but the fact that it did it, I don't know. That really just I don't know. Whereas, and I'm sure there's plenty of programmers that felt that way, or artists or writers who had that
Mm.
same moment where you're like, oh man, that kind of hurts. That
Yeah,
was the one that got me. But at the same time, that's our reality now. Like this is, it's out there. There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube, or as they
yeah,
say, like the genie's out of the bottle. So I think we just have to say like, all right, this is out in the world. You can't really like police it very well. Like, right? People create these like, oh, AI detectors, like, oh, you use ChatGPT to
yeah.
write this. Those things are never very accurate.
Mm.
I mean, the models were trained on human beings, human writing samples, like
Right.
they had one task, sound human. So like, how are you really going to train a good classifier to say human or AI? Like none
Mm.
of them are very good. So like, to come down on a student for cheating, you have to know, right? Like that's a
Yeah,
big thing. Like
yeah,
fortunately, I've been fortunate, I haven't had to do much of that. But yeah, so I think like trying to kind of police it out of your course, it'll never work. So
yeah,
I think you're better off just accepting that this is going to be part of the process for students learning and producing course materials, assignments, things like that.
Mm.
So if anything, make them harder, right? Like make your
Right.
assignments harder. Just assume like, all right, you're going to use AI. I've talked about how to use it effectively, giving you some resources to learn how to use it effectively. Because not everyone has spent time developing expertise in this, but fortunately,
Mm.
folks like you are creating resources so that people, you don't have to know it. Just point it to, maybe this conversation and get some
Yeah.
ideas for that. But yeah, push your students to do more. Don't, and because I think if something is now like we've lowered the barrier so much that like the thing that used to be hard is now easy. Well, let's come
Mm.
up with something harder now so that assuming you have this tool, like now you have to hit that mark.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, it comes back to really understanding why you're asking what you're asking. Why am I asking the student to do this task?
Yeah.
What's the value?
Right,
Um,
right. If
uh,
ChatGPT can do it easily, there's probably not much value anymore. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe that was a great thing to ask, and now it's not. Oh well, we
yeah,
got to move on. Like
yeah,
genie's out of the bottle.
yeah, yeah. And then figuring out what the added value of the human is in the process, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that's why I keep going back to like oral exams,
Yeah,
presentations, because like you think like, all right, what's the thing that like, not to make everything economic arguments, but like in the end, if you think like somebody's developing a product that involves some chemical process, some code, whatever, what's the thing that people aren't going to want to like just trust in AI? Like in the end, you want somebody to take responsibility for it. Be like, yep, I've looked over it, I've tested it. This
yeah,
thing is legit. Here's why I think it's legit.
yeah.
And that's why, being able to explain the code that maybe you didn't write it all entirely yourself, you used an AI to help you, but in the end, you understand it beginning to end, and you can explain it to another person. You can give a
Mm,
strong presentation explaining how it works. You can have a conversation with somebody and be able to like speak freely about what it's doing. I
mm.
think that's so important now, and that is like maybe that's the thing that like can't be replaced is just a human being that can both explain what's happening, answer questions, and give the potential customer, the potential client, potential student, somebody confidence that like, all right, this thing is worth checking out, this is worth considering, this is worth buying, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and it's going to have the desired outcome. So it's again coming back to this notion of benefits and limitations. You know the limitations of the output, right?
Yeah,
You can only use it under these circumstances because of
right.
X, Y, and Z parameters.
Yep. You can
It's
trust that
not
this
going to
car.
solve, you know, the energy crisis or whatever.
Right, right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, and I think people, a lot of folks are at the point now where like they like, all right, this is definitely important. Like they're sold on this is important, but they're not sure how to involve it. Like I
yeah.
feel like there's so many tools now that like now it has an AI companion, and I'm like, oh God, please no. I don't want that. Or like Clippy back in the day that they tried to put in like
Yes.
nobody wanted Clippy. So now we're gonna get fancy Clippies and everything. So thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah. Okay, great. Excellent. Jean-Marc, thank you. I think this has been a very useful conversation and
My pleasure.
totally what I was hoping we would cover.